Hello, lovely people. My name is Ravi Verma. You're watching Free Stuff. Today, we'll be talking about SSDs, solid state drives. What is solid state drive? Why is it so solid? And what are the kind of performances that we can expect from an SSD? How and what are the ways to maintain it? And is there any degradation or any kind of wear and tear with it? SSDs are NAND flash drives, which means they don't need power to retain data. That's what NAND is. NAND flash drives are flash drives that don't need power to retain data. And their main agenda is to increase the capacity per cell and reduce the power cost. And that's what is being used on SSDs. And SSDs are they don't have any moving part. Traditionally, hard drives had moving parts. Now with SSDs, they don't have any moving part. They draw very less power. So your battery on your laptop is not drained. Unlike what hard drives used to draw, SSDs draw very little power. Hence, SSDs are much cooler because number one, it doesn't have any moving parts to it, no mechanical parts, nothing rotating inside, so it doesn't generate any heat. Plus, it draws very less amount of power. So again, very less amount of heat is produced from SSDs. So SSDs are primarily, these are the reason why it's called as solid. Along with that, it doesn't have any chances of breaking, such as hard drives. If you drop your laptop, or let's say you turned off your laptop and you closed it very hard, sometimes it happens, and there are chances that the hard drive may go bad, but with SSDs it doesn't. So it doesn't have that shock tendencies where if you kick your CPU, I'm sorry, not the CPU, if you kick your cabinet, maybe your hard disk gets a shock and it might had a chance of going bad, but with SSDs that's not the case anymore. Now traditionally or in general, SSDs would give us 2 times better performance or better speed compared to the best hard drives as well. So these are the reasons why I believe SSDs are gaining the market right now. Everybody is going forward towards SSDs instead of hard disk drives. Now, what are the kind of performances and what are the kind of interfaces available today? So SSDs started with SATA. We do have SSDs with IDE and ATA interfaces, and they are basically used for embedded systems. What I mean by embedded system, that systems such as your supermarket would have devices, some car audio systems and things like that, which doesn't have to kind of power on or boot up very frequently. So when these devices or these kind of interfaces used to take long time in booting, so they might still have IDE or ATA connections, interfaces, but then again, the main prevalent interface that's available in the market is either SATA 3.0 or PCI NVMe. So with SATA 3.0, the best or the max that you can pull out or write to, or the kind of performance that you can get, is about 600 Mbps. But with PCI NVMe, you can expect around 3 to 4 times of that, which is about 4 gigs, of Gbps of transfer rates. But you should actually, when purchasing an SSD, you should actually look at various items such as read speed, write speed, IOPS, and random read write speeds, sequential read write speeds. Those are the things that you should be kind of comparing between different versions of SSDs, along with the interface that they bring with it. So normal 3.0 SATA would be cheaper than a PCI Express NVMe SSD, and the difference will be quite huge. General 3.0 SATA SSD would give you around 600 Mbps of speed, and here you would get 4 Gbps of speed with NVMe PCI Express. And IOPS would also differentiate in lakhs. Here you might get in your SATA drives, you might get into thousands, but in PCI NVMe you would get into lakhs IOPS. So that's the kind of difference we are talking, and hence the price is different. So depending on your need, you could go for whichever kind of SSDs you
When we
need.
talk about performances, we need to understand what AHCI and NVMe differentiates each other from, right? So, advanced host controller interface AHCI versus non-volatile memory express NVMe. So with AHCI, it becomes the bottleneck when we are using SATA SSDs, because it was not designed for 150. It was designed for 150 or 200 transfer rate, but now with SSDs you're looking at 4 gigs per second. So it kind of becomes a bottleneck, and that's why it is being replaced by NVMe. And NVMe brings around 6500 queues for 6500 commands, versus AHCI's one queue with 32 commands. So we understand why it's so beneficial to use NVMe now, and also why it is so costly. So there will be time when it will not be costly, but then today, if we are going forward for data centers or anywhere we want to kind of use SSDs for a bigger and a higher performance, we should go for NVMe PCI SSDs.
You would question whether the SSD is going to go bad at some time. Yes, it's a device. It might get degraded. It might get used up, wear and tear, common wear and tear, but it will not be as bad as a traditional hard drive. So, uh, a wear and tear on an SSD is known as wear out. That's the technical term called as wear out, in which the cells would kind of get burnt out because of heavy usage of data read, write, read activities on that device. But then again, you and I should not be worried about, because by the time it kind of gets degraded, we'll be changing the whole device itself, right? So we don't need to be worried about that hard disk or that SSD device, because it will happen in a very, 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 very long time, about 4 or 5 years from now, if we are kind of going to use it heavily in a data intrinsic environment. But if I am using it on my on my laptop, then I don't need to worry about it at all, even for 4 or 5 years. So and it will not just go blip bad, right? It goes gradual. It doesn't go bad overnight. If it is going bad, the performance will get degraded. And some of the vendors actually, to overcome this problem, they kind of provision more space than what they are marketing. So that kind of helps us. As a consumer, it helps us. So that is the wear and tear that can happen with your SSD device. Now, how do you maintain? In general, everybody is so freaky about defragmentation. When you talk about hard disk drive, how do you maintain that? Everybody would suggest you to go ahead and do a defragmentation. Not really sure how much performance gain we get from it, but then everybody does that. I have also done it. So you should never do that on SSDs, because read and write kind of wears it out. Defragmentation will add to it. So we should never do defragmentation on an SSDs. With SSDs, there is something called as trim. Trim commands are available for SSDs, and these are available with the newer version of Windows operating system, starting from Windows 7, Windows 10. They do by default have this command inbuilt, and they by default come enabled. We'll look at how to check if trim is enabled in your operating system or not. We'll now look at how to check if trim is enabled or not. So we are on Windows 2016. We are going to open command prompt, which I already have it in administrator mode. I'm just going to run fs util behavior query disable, delete, notify. There you go. So if NTFS disable, delete, notify is equals to 1, that means trim is disabled. But if it is 0, which is here in this case, which means trim is enabled. So by default, trim is enabled in latest operating systems. If not, then you will need to use native utilities from the vendors such as Western Digital or Samsung or Seagate. They'll have their utilities to issue those commands. Thank you. Of what we saw, and 2500 250 GB PCIe NVMe and M2 series, right? So read write speed about 3400 to 1500 Mbps, and this is what I was talking about, right? Sequential speed, read speed of 3400, sequential write of 1500, and IOPS of 200,000, 350,000, 15,000, 50,000, 4K QD, 4K QD. So this is where the differences lie when you're purchasing SSDs. So take a look at these performances, and then you will be able to understand why the price is different in different SSDs. Thank you.